I was at a small dinner recently, and one of the attendees served on the board of directors at Electronic Arts, or EA, which is the second largest video game publisher in the world and the developer of many well-known franchises. Well, my first inclination was to talk to this person about EA, given my obvious passion for games. I didn't. Why? Because I was always taught, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And realized in the moment that I don't actually have anything nice to say about EA these days. What was once a brand I trusted is now the embodiment of many of the things I find wrong with the industry. On today's show, we dig deeper into EA's impact on the industry, both in gaming's distant past, as well as their current influence on the industry as one of its leading companies. Welcome to episode 55 of the Business Casual Gamers podcast, the show focused on gamers with jobs, families, and who have things to do in real life. I'm Aaron Connick, alongside my co-host, Chris Smoke. Chris, how are we doing this week?
We are doing very, very well. We are back, as you might have noticed.
Back!
From a pretty long hiatus. Want to say we apologize for that. I won't get into too many details, but really just suffice it to say, when we both have family health issues that pop up, it kind of takes a lot of our time away, and unfortunately that meant that we could not do the podcast for a couple months here, but we are back. I'm excited to be
glad
back
to be back in
the saddle, and I think, Aaron, we couldn't have a better episode to start with. So before we get into it, of course, you can find us on our website at businesscasualgamers.com. Please check us out there. Check us out on Twitter at BISCasualGamers. Also, check us out on YouTube. We have a lot of fun things there. Hopefully, we're going to get back into the grind with some of those things we had talked about before. And if you have a chance, please, we really would appreciate you going out and rating us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher. We're on Spotify. Wherever you can find us, wherever you get your podcast, please give us a rating and a comment. We really do appreciate that. That helps us focus back on what we want to do and figure out what we're doing right and wrong. And so, Aaron, Let's get into this fun topic about EA.
This is going to be interesting. So I want to go, Chris, all the way back that, given our target demographic, I would say this does not predate everybody. However, we're going back to 1982, which is the year I was born. So we're going most of the way back.
Way back, that's right.
And so in 1982, Trip Hawkins, still, I think, a name that some people who have been around the industry for a while remember. Trip was an early Apple employee, made a ton of money, got his start really at a venture firm, Sequoia Capital, which is one of the top VC firms in the world. Really big company, still fast forward to today. And worked out of their spare office space, ironically enough, to go all the way back. They had a really different model than if you look back on some of the early developers, in that instead of just saying, hey, we're a couple of guys who grew up loving computers and trying to build our own thing, our own game idea, he had a very different model. He wanted to operate his game company much more like a venture capital or an angel investor does today, where he would say, hey, I'm going to be more like a studio where people who have their big ideas are going to come to him. They're going to pitch their ideas, and then he is going to fund the development of that game and basically allow them to make their creation. And so that was a really novel model at the time of like, hey, I'm a publisher. I'm not really, it's like, oh, you make video games. Well, kind of. It's like, I don't make the games, but I make I make them happen. And so it's interesting, Chris, because I know obviously you are making games now. And so you kind of look at that and say, well, you actually make the games, and you contrast that to the guy who says, I'll know it when I see it. Like you come to me and you tell me, and once I hear like that's it, and I think this person knows what they're doing, I'm going to give you some money and I'm going to give you some time and I'll commit to publish the game. And so it was a really novel concept that, honestly, in the early days of the industry, it got a lot of people off the ground.
It's a great model. I mean, think about it. You think about even other industries, not even technology or having startups or things like that. Image Comics, one of my favorites from way back when Image Comics was formed, they were focused on very similar models as well, where instead of saying we're going to go hire a whole bunch of artists that draw us the next gen Spider-Man or whatnot, we're going to have people with cool ideas, things like The Walking Dead, for example, come pitch us their ideas. We're going to help them figure out how to give them access to the legal and the production, all the things that creative people don't want to deal with. They just want to write their stories and draw their stories and get them out there. We're going to help them do that, and we're going to do it in a unique way that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because if we can expand on that, you think of all the elements of if you move forward, like you said, you have the idea for the game, and you think about all of the business stuff that you just say, I just want to make my game.
Yeah, so much of it.
And also, if you look at the model back then from Tripp's standpoint, let's just say he was trying to make the game himself. You can't make 5 games by yourself at the same time, right? You need to focus.
Barely make one.
Right, and you need to get that out the door. This is a model that allows him to, if he hears 5 great ideas, right, you can't pick them all. You're committing now, granted, back then games did not take 5 years and hundreds of millions of dollars. But even still, you were going to have to pick up one idea and hope that the rest hadn't been replicated by the time you get to it. So using this kind of a seed model or venture model, he was able to greenlight a lot of ideas when at the time in video gaming, a lot of stuff was a novel new idea. And, he was able to get a lot of stuff published and developed and start to build those relationships with developers to say, okay, if I'm going to fund 5 games, maybe 3 of them are going to work, but of those 3, I might know who's got talent, who's going to bring me the next game that's going to be a hit. So, really novel model, and early on, huge impact on the industry. So, fast forward a couple of years when we actually make the push into their first in-house development. Now, Chris, I almost want to pause for a trivia moment for our audience of who can guess what the first in-house console game developed by EA was. So Chris, I can't even impersonate the sound because it's so god awful, but that would be the NES classic Skate or Die.
I just know the Skate or Die 2, the yo dude, skate straight. That's the good one.
That is the good one. Skate or Die, I rented the game growing up, so it has a fond spot in my heart, even though I'm not quite sure what I played. I remember the half pipe joust, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I don't know if it's stood the test of time. Maybe they're going to announce it at E3. I don't know.
I'm sure. Yes,
but I would say that EA, what started with kind of a novel but kind of mediocre and not huge selling NES game. Skate or Die does not come at the top of most people's list. It didn't make the NES Classic, right? It's not the top of the top, but it's a game people remember.
Right.
Go to the next generation, go to the Genesis, and you really see the growth of EA as a developer and a publisher. They really kept the Genesis afloat and produced some of the biggest hits that honestly defined. So if you go through that era and you say, okay, let's figure out what EA games, what had EA on the box. Madden. This was the birth of Madden. Huge game that, arguably now is probably one of the most important franchises, if not the most important franchise out there. Road Rash, which is a game we've talked about. I know you've got it in the background somewhere there. Desert Strike, all the million Strike games that came out of that. And they were just really on a roll. And one of the things that and I know you being more of a PC gamer growing up than me can appreciate this, they had a string of hits, and the reason in part that they were able to kind of push these out and get these at the quality level they were able to was because they focused on games that were easily portable from the PC, because the chip in the Genesis was similar to many of the PC architectures that they were looking at. So they said, great, we can co-develop these games, or we at least have enough knowledge gained on the PC development to be able to kind of, bridge the gap, if you will, through the Genesis. And so you really saw that quality difference in EA titles from a lot of the rest of the field in a way that I think people are like, who is this EA company? They took notice.
I had NHL, all the NHL games. I love the NHL stuff that they had. I didn't play as much Madden on the Genesis, but you're right. Aside from games like Skate or Die, this was, at the time, I think it worked really well with the new image that Tom Kalinske was building for Sega in the Sonic era as well. Because, they're rebranding, they're attacking Nintendo a little bit more, they're getting more aggressive. Along those same things, there's nothing more aggressive, I think, than Skate or Die.
Yeah, that's true.
Here's the guys on motorcycles who are racing and kicking people off, using chain whips against cops. All sorts of things that fit really well into that kind of teenage rebel mentality. And I think that really, I don't think it was intentional necessarily Maybe it was, but initially it didn't seem like it was. Where it aligned so well with what the Genesis was trying to portray in its marketing campaigns, with Sonic being cool and such, that the EA games just kind of floated to the top. And that's with that combined with some of the nuances, like slightly different cartridge enclosures and things like that, just kind of made it interesting for kids of the 90s that wanted to pick up something interesting.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I find interesting that you really have to kind of fast forward to years later to see the effect of this. At the time, we've talked about it many times, when you're in, let's say, the NES era, there wasn't really this concept of sequels so much. I mean, there were certain genres that got, certain franchises that got sequels by the time the first generation was over. But the reality is, if you went from Mega Man 1 to Mega Man 2, there wasn't this feeling like this is a franchise. It was just, they made another one of these, right? There wasn't this thought of there's going to be an annual installment of Mega Man or Madden or whatever. And EA was really, I felt like, the first company that both with when they started going through the sports games, they get the years and things like that. You felt like they were building an identity for some of their games to say, this is not just you're getting one John Madden game and that's it. It started to feel like, okay, this is going to be like the Genesis game, the football game, or the NHL game. And that really, it's funny because in the moment, I don't know that I thought of that, but when you look back at some of their games, you really kind of see that they were starting to carve this niche out for themselves of like, no, this is the one that you want, right? This is the recognizable, we paid for the John Madden license. We got this is the one that's better than all the other football games that are getting released. And whether it was or it wasn't, I think it had that kind of look and feel, the cover art, the licensing, the fact that the graphics, like all of these things were just a little bit better to the point where you'd say, EA, there must be something to this.
It's for me as a player of a lot of those games, it's all about the licensing for me because not that I wasn't watching hockey all the time, but I love the Pittsburgh Penguins, I love Mario Lemieux and all those characters, all those people, and to be able to, as a kid, right, one of the best things you could do from a kind of a passive sport fan perspective is get in there and play as your hero, right? Yeah. And take your best team, your Penguins or whoever, or, and on the baseball side or football, whatever it is, take your team to the ultimate, championship game and win that game, be the player that you wanted to be. And I think that's what held a lot of games back. You think about like RBI baseballs, and some of those had some licenses down the time when Tengen had them. But you think about how a generic baseball game with generic teams with generic players can only be so good when you're trying to emulate Major League Baseball in a sense. And so I think it was even now we see them in modern times, they are kind of the only shop in town which can secure some of these exclusive licenses. It must cost them an absolute fortune, but I'm sure it's really important because people who, like I said, kids want to do this. And now you get to the point where, sadly enough, you get people like us who are a little bit further, we're a little more into the middle-aged category. Like, there's no chance that I'm going to go become an NFL player right now. So I have to live vicariously through the video games, right? And so that's really an interesting point that I think has made their entire sports franchise component very strong. Plus, I'd say, the it's in the game thing that they keep doing, the tying it back to reality in that the game, the simulation that they put out is, even though there are bugs here or there, is so closely related to the actual game. All the rules are there, all the nuances are there. That keeps getting better at its simulation, where you can definitely play a Madden game where you put it on crazy rules and you can throw 200-yard passes in a sense, right? Just chuck the ball. But a lot of that simulation can be toned down so that it is really, the grind to get every yard that the NFL players face. Yeah. And that just kind of ties it all together.
And I want to expand on the one point you made. So people who go back with EA, the EA Sports, it's in the game, right? At the time, I had no concept when I was that age of what a publisher or a developer was, right? You just saw, here's the name that I have to watch at the beginning before I can play football.
And hopefully it's cool to watch.
And hopefully it's cool to watch. Not everybody did that, though, at the time. I mean, splash screens were not, EA wasn't the only person doing this. But the reality was, that kind of like in your face, oh, well, this grabbed my attention. This is kind of catchy. That was not just universal at the time. And I really remember at the time thinking of EA as just one of those kind of top flight developers. I mean, I didn't play all of their games,
right?
But that was a logo that I recognized. That if you would have said, hey, you're going to Toys R Us today and you're buying a game, I would have taken notice and said, yeah, I remember that game. That was pretty good. And the brand was starting to stick in my mind to the point where, right? It's the safe bet. And it's amazing that at the time, it is still an era where new ideas are still coming to the forefront, right? Not every game has been built at that point. There's still lots of new unexplored territory. But if you look at 10, 20 years later, as that identity really starts to manifest itself, and everything has to be a safe bet, a sure thing, a million plus seller, EA really laid the groundwork for that early, so that by the time they're building bigger games with bigger budgets and taking bigger risks, that brand identity is there to where people still remember the John Madden football announcements, beginning to say, okay, they haven't messed it up too bad yet, so I'm gonna stick through this, and as long as they deliver the goods, I'll buy the next game too. And that really carried EA through those early days, certainly through that Genesis console cycle. And so, Chris, this is where, and I expect some spirited conversation here, because this is, again, there's no right or wrong answer here. But I think you saw a noted turn at a certain point once you start kind of getting past the Genesis era into the next generation. So like all great public companies, there becomes this point in your life cycle where there is this insatiable appetite for growth, right? And you start to say, well, I can't, I have people pitching me games, but I can't take a chance on all these new people, and some of these are going to flame out, and not all of these are going to be million sellers. I can't just rely on, Dude Bro coming and pitching me a game that's going to sell 10,000 copies. That's not what the investors are expecting. And so you saw this real departure going from small pitch to, no, I don't need the single game pitch. I'm going to go after the established developer that's already got the hit or got the thing that people have bought, and I think that if I put my dollars and my brand behind it, I can make it even bigger. And they went into this massive acquisition phase where they started buying up talent. So talk you through a couple of the notable ones. Maxis. We will definitely come back to this, but all the Sim stuff that became the cornerstone. That the Sims had their own division within the company. I mean, all of the Sim games. So that was huge. BioWare. That was a really big, surprising acquisition. I think BioWare was like the hero of people who said, I don't want the Square Enix, I don't want the JRPG, I want this different thing. And BioWare, they carved out an early niche for themselves that I think EA probably rightly saw. Origin Systems, Bullfrog, right? You have all these developers of varying degrees of popularity in their kind of own segments of the world and their own niche categories. But EA just started finding people who's got the last hit, and can we make them an offer, and can we spawn sequels and kind of have these franchises, right, Chris? That's got to be the word now. We've got to annualize, we've got to franchise it. Yeah. And it's funny because at that point, I felt like the strategy became, I'm not going to worry about the next hit. I'm going to worry about milking the last hit and getting as much as I can and exposing that to as many new players. And like I said, Chris, I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer, but there became a point at which I said, EA is definitely not a developer. They are like a curator of studios. I stopped associating them with them being their own thing and just said, okay, well, what is the next thing they're going to fund, basically? And so it almost kind of went back to the origin where it didn't feel like a developer anymore. It was just like, no, this is a studio.
Yeah, I feel like this specific area, and the acquisition phase, they never really stopped the acquisition phase. You could argue that they're still kind of doing that right now. So we have to be careful about how we cage this particular part of the life cycle of the company, but I'd say that where they got when they initially started to look and go out in this kind of big acquisition, focus, I think it's a little bit more of a, to your point, public company, the shareholders demand more and more and more. There's a fiduciary duty for some of these, for the executives and the board members. That becomes a driving factor. And I think it seems to me that there is something organic about that growth that they're doing. Now, the question is, right, and the big thing that I think we're bringing up here is, at what point are you moving too much to that acquisition model, too much to your point, to kind of the milking phase as opposed to taking more risks?
Right.
This is probably the time, and granted, again, the window, the time span here is probably relatively large, but this is probably the time, and we've talked about it before, where development of games, the budgets for these games had gone from a couple $1 million to the tens of millions, and to and even more. And as those things continue to rise, it just drives, like, the stakes are larger. Obviously, it drives a lot of these more stable, long-term, like kind of revenue threads, as opposed to we're going to go try this new IP. We're going to dump like $30 million into this, and maybe it's going to flop, and we're going to not make any money. We're going to be in the hole. That's a big problem that for any company, right?
Yep.
I was struck by, unfortunately, Cliff Bleszinski's new company recently failed, and he had this big thing on Twitter about it that was a little bit of an interesting read. And if you're interested in that, I go back and look at his Twitter about it. I found it very interesting. Yeah, what he noted was, he was talking about, since the company folded, he had been kind of showing some of the things they've been working on. And the thing he mentioned was, we shopped this idea around to multiple publishers, big companies, couldn't get anyone to bite. And the striking part of that conversation is what came next. He said, the budget was $40 million. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that is, go back to the beginning of this episode. We started talking about how we're in this VC capital thing, right? And VCs operate, if you're unfamiliar, a lot of these operate by, in the traditional technology, venture capital sense, they're going to give you a seed round, maybe, or someone else gives you a seed round of a couple $100,000. You build some sort of proof of concept. They're going to come in with maybe a Series A round with $1 million.
Yeah,
maybe,
they're,
right?
they're not
talking
going
pennies
whole
for them,
hog
right?
on day one.
No one, very, very few people are able to come in very quickly with like tens of millions, much less $40 million. Now, granted, Cliff Bleszinski has a name for himself. He did the Gears of War stuff. He was Epic for years. He split off to go do his own thing. If I'm, granted, I'm not an investor, but me going back and looking in that space, I could still see a lot of risk in what he was doing. And the game Lawbreakers that came out was basically, in my mind, Unreal Tournament with a little bit of craziness mixed in. It wasn't a lot of interesting stuff. And so if I'm looking at him and he's saying this new studio is untested, $40 million is a huge bet. This is where I think, this is what's driving this from EA's perspective. Well, yeah, SimCity, The Sims, all these things, millions and millions of people play these games. Everyone loves SimCity. Everyone loves the BioWare stuff. Origin, I don't know. I don't really know what Origin had been doing at the time other than the kind of the platform.
Yeah.
But I think that was an interesting component there for what they're doing. They're trying to shore up their revenue sources, give them, something that's a little bit more stable. And then we start going back to the other conversations we've had before of, this is when some of the creativity starts to drop off, right?
And it's interesting because once we get to that point, I do not think there is a game or a console cycle or any specific franchise. I don't know that there was a point, as we were talking about this topic, where the narrative switched for me, where I said, EA is kind of not really my thing anymore. There wasn't a point in time where I just noticed it and took that in.
There was one for me.
Was there?
We'll get to it.
There's one for me. So let's talk. I want to talk. There's no. This is not going to go in chronological order, but let's talk about some of the categories, right, where they have made big bets or they have had a clear category leader, and then you've seen the lead switch, and they are now kind of playing catch up. So the most, even though I think maybe not many people listening to this played it or really this was not
there.
Yeah, but they tried to, and if anybody could have done it, you would think it might be EA. They tried to take on World of Warcraft, and they were going to make the competitor MMO game with the Star Wars license, right? If there was ever, there's no sure things in life.
Right.
But if there was ever a thing where you had to be sitting back and saying, I think this could work, or at least there's a player base that's passionate enough, that loves this IP enough to possibly make it succeed. Star Wars MMO seemed like a reasonable place to go. I mean, Knights of the Old Republic was a big game, all this. It had a decent sprint out of the gate, but it just never built a player base.
Right,
and for all the money that was spent, and that was one of the most expensive games ever made at the time, it probably still ranks up there. But it just didn't do anything. And again, World of Warcraft, well, it's not lighting the world on fire anymore, and nobody really talks about it in the same way. It's still got a monthly subscriber base that is doing just fine. And for a game where not the content base is not what they're not trying to churn out content as actively as they used to. You still got people forking over money every month to play the game, and Star Wars, even if they made it free, I don't think could maintain a player base these days. So that was kind of one thing where you said, okay, maybe I'll write that one off as MMOs. There's only ever really been one big one at a time, and okay, maybe that's fine. We'll move on. Let's go to racing. Need for Speed was a huge franchise for a lot of games. Really big, really notable, had soundtracks that were real life, was really cool. And then suddenly you go to the generation where Gran Turismo became a thing and Forza became a thing. And suddenly, Need for Speed, people were still buying it. People were still playing it, but it was not the racing game. It was suddenly there's a non-first party racing game. And okay, if I'm bored of Gran Turismo because I've played it enough, maybe I'll pick up a Need for Speed game. That's fine.
What gets me about this one is because I went through that exact same transition. So I love Need for Speed. So I'm a big Porsche fan, right? And Need for Speed did this whole Porsche thing with 911s, really cool cars. I loved playing those games. And I was probably the last kind of person that went from a simulation, or from a racing perspective, I was not a big simulation guy, right? Gran Turismo came out, and I loved the graphics, what really brought me to that game. And then I realized, this is kind of a simulation. I'm not really sure that I have the wherewithal to really see this thing through. Yeah. And so what was interesting about it is this is such a pronounced decline that I went from buying, or at least strongly considering to buy, every Need for Speed game to never playing any of the new ones. And in fact, the last one I bought was the one that came out for the PS4 because it was like the only game that was launched that I really wanted. So I bought that one, played it for like 3 or 4 hours, and stopped playing it as soon as something better came along. Meanwhile, I now consider myself a pretty big fan, we've talked about it before, of Gran Turismo, and I'd probably be even a bigger fan of Forza if I had a Microsoft console. That has been such a pronounced failure to have someone who loves kind of I'd say a little bit more of the less simulation, more kind of wild in your face, crazy arcadey racing games, right? To turn them into someone who likes simulation just because they want to play the best driving game out there, it is really pronounced, right?
Yeah, I don't think this is true of maybe last generation. The most recent 2 Need for Speed games are bargain bin status. I mean, it is literal, hey, it's on sale. This is the free game of the month. This is, went down to a $20 or less game very quickly because they're not good. And that is a marked decline in quality for a franchise that's put out, I don't know what the total game count is, but again, another category you're saying, ain't what it used to be. Let's talk about sports, because sports is something where if anybody associates EA with anything nowadays, it associates it with sports. But let's go back over a decade at this point where there was actual competition in sports games. The day that I knew that EA as a company was in trouble was the day that I remember I went to the Target on Shallowford and Sandy Plains, right? And I remember that I'm not a big sports game guy, but I enjoyed watching, playing football, whatnot. And I remember seeing NFL 2K5, right? And $20 game. I was like, $20, huh? And I just kind of filed that away. I went home and I read up, and people were saying, no, they're serious. They are making a push. The $20, don't think that that's a bargain basement game. They are actively going after EA's turf, and this is the real deal. This is the football game you want. I said, really? I played this game. There are people that write about that game to this day and say, EA has never gotten this aspect of football as good as they had it back in 2005.
Wow.
And what was interesting is after that game, that moved the needle. And that game, I don't know the final sales numbers, but they were sufficiently scared where after that, the NFL sold an exclusive license so that there could be no more than one football game. So that is a category in which we've never seen competition again because EA bought the license up to eliminate all competition. Now listen, whether you love Madden, whether you love FIFA, whether you love whatever, there has been plenty of fan malcontent towards the way they have managed that franchise, where people have just said, "This is what I want." And it is clear you're not selling me what I actually want. I'm willing to compromise because I want to play a football game. But this is not the business model I want. You have neglected these certain features, or it doesn't feel realistic, or it's too complicated. And I just feel like the narrative, you look at another category in sports, so soccer, or football, as they would say on Teen Titans, as I like to pronounce. But they have had Pro Evolution Soccer has been a competitor for years that stuck around. And even as recently as this past weekend, where EA had to announce that they had to buy a license away from Pro Evolution to try and further cement their status, Pro Evolution has hung on for a long time, and Konami is a mess. But the fact that they have hung in there despite all of EA's resources and brand power, Pro Evolution still has people who are like, no, FIFA's just not as good. All the licenses they've bought, all that, it's just not as good. And I feel like every sports category, MLB The Show, right? Another competitor. Like, you've got all these non-EA games that just seem to be chipping away, and all EA can seem to do is like, no, exclusive license. I'll throw money at the problem. And, that's a solution, I suppose, if you want to juice up sales figures and corner the market. But I think from a fan perspective, I think there still is this feeling of, I wonder what would happen if somebody made a different football game these days.
Yeah, I really do wonder. I mean, it's hard. It's hard being the underdog in that scenario, especially from that simulation aspect I had mentioned. They put so much time into building the true football simulation with Madden. It's hard to beat. So I think how you beat that really is you go after the more arcadiness. Now, not the arcadiness where like you throw 200-yard pass, right? Way outside of the stadium. But I think you play it. You build something that is similar, but not as one of the things that I think that kind of defers a lot of people away from Madden is that, at least in a couple of years back, I think that they've tried to kind of rein this in a little bit, but some of the the simulation aspects just get so hard for novice or casual players to play. I remember a number of years back in mid-2000s, they had this like quarterback vision thing. So if you're the quarterback, you snap the ball, you want to throw to the guy on the left, you had to like use the right stick to move the quarterback's vision over to that side and then throw the pass, or else you risk a severe miss throw. And that stuff just drove me insane. Like, I just want to hike the ball, hit X to throw it to the dude that's X, and like run the ball afterwards. I don't want to play anything more crazy than that. And that's there are plenty of people that love the simulation in Madden, and more power to them. But I think the more casual gamer wants to just play, make big plays, knock the ball out of defenders' hands, all those kinds of things.
I want the 40-yard pass. That's like all I want. Stuff. That's what I want to do in that game.
And that's the thing that they that if there is a market opportunity, it can happen. And you mentioned one thing that is interesting. You mentioned the show. I mean, I actually don't know if EA has really conceded the baseball line to them, because it's clearly the number one game in the MLB side. They have the license. I can't even tell you the last time I saw a triple play. That series has been gone for a while now. But
we might bring it back on this casual gamers.
We will, because back in the early PlayStation 1 days, triple play was awesome.
Absolutely
awesome. Anyway,
so that's kind of maybe where they're hanging on, but chinks in the armor, let's say. Let's go to maybe the most consequential area where they have ceded ground, which is the first-person shooter. So a lot of people forget, because there's many people that came to the video game hobby through Halo, through Call of Duty. People forget that those were young upstart games at one point. Like, they have an origin story. And at the time, Medal of Honor was a huge franchise. Like that
Medal
was
of what?
right.
Sorry.
There are many people that if you said Medal of Honor would literally have that reaction. It's like, I've never heard of who makes that? When was the last game made? And I will never forget, because I will tell you that I thought that even though I'm not a huge first-person shooter, I remember playing the World War II one when it got all this praise for, wow, you're going on the beaches of Normandy and it feels so realistic. And like there was a lot of hype around the last Medal of Honor, but I never will forget the narrative that came afterwards where there was just this World War II fatigue. It's like we're replaying the same crap over and over again. There's no originality. And it opened the door for then Call of Duty to come in and say, "How about modern warfare? Like, why don't we let you fire like a javelin missile instead of going for the M1 carbine and whatnot?" And it completely refreshed the category. People were saying like, "Yes, I want exactly that. Give me more of that." And I think that they have since tried to refresh Medal of Honor once to nobody caring. Battlefield is another EA franchise where they've made not the exact same thing. They've certainly made progress and come back. But the fact that they even had to play catch up at this point, they were the big dog in town when it came. They were the category at a point in time. I mean, it was like them, or maybe you're talking Doom or something like that. But the reality is that was the game, and suddenly you're not even talking like the second tier game. You're talking Gears of War, Halo, Call of Duty. I can name 5 to 10 games that anybody would say is a better game than any Medal of Honor ever thought about being. And that is, given how big, we've talked about it on other shows, given how big that category is nowadays, you really can't afford to be 8th place in the shooter category and be a large public company, second biggest publisher in the world. That just doesn't cut it. And you can tell EA's desperate, and they've been trying to kind of reestablish themselves over the years. But I just don't think people care, and I don't think people trust them in the way. And I'm not sure what they can do to get it back.
I don't know. And this FPS thing, I think they need to just they are beginning a push with Battlefield, and Battlefield is moving, is making some pretty decent strides, I think. I think what happened, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but you think about the Frostbite engine that is now used in Madden and FIFA, and was used in some of the Star Wars games, and then also I think it made its way into, the last Battlefield as well. That has really done a lot for it, because I think it just makes the entire experience look really neat. I played the latest Battlefield, the single player. I played a little bit of the multiplayer, but it was pretty fun. I think it was, it's hard to unseat Call of Duty now. Yeah. Among those kind of bro shooters, it's the kind of thing that you want to play. And I think that the Medal of Honor thing just needs to go away. I don't know if they're even making any more of them. They shouldn't. Battlefield's a good contender, but they have to get away from, I think, direct competition with Call of Duty. They can't be trying to clone it, because they're segmenting this market a little bit. Very few people will go buy both games. Very few. Yeah. And certainly, people can only put their time and effort into one multiplayer experience, which is really where they want everyone. Like, they don't care about the single player stuff. They just want to do, look at Star Wars Battlefront, the first one. No, nothing, just only online stuff. No single player campaign. And you look at that, and that really shows you, A, where they want to invest their money, B, where they want you to play. And unlike you and me and anyone else who can be playing a single-player campaign, I can play a little bit of one game and then a little bit of another game, I can be simultaneously playing 2 or 3 games over time. When you're putting effort into a multiplayer experience that is implicitly, if not explicitly, designed for you to out-level, outgun, play more, be better than other people you're playing, you don't have time to screw around with anything else. You've got one game you're playing. That's not I don't think that's really the winnable scenario that they want to put themselves in, if I'm being honest.
No, I think that's a totally fair point. So let's talk about a genre that's near and dear to both of our hearts. So let's talk about the RPGs, Chris, because if any category where they had the fandom on their side, it had to have been with Mass Effect. Because Mass Effect, I will tell you, I haven't played all of them. I own the Mass Effect trilogy. I played through 2. I loved it. It's a great game. I still do want to go back and play 1 and 3, regardless of commentary or feelings on those, because I did. I enjoyed 2 enough that stood out in my mind. And I don't want to get too far into it because we're going to come back to those in our next section. But to your point, the fact that you had to kind of say, oh, man, Mass Effect. I mean, you can find the latest Mass Effect for maybe... So, like, I always kind of track how big a failure a game was by if I were to go on Amazon, right? When you're at the $20 price point, that's fine. That usually just means it's old, it's sold through, it's been reprinted. That's fine. If it can hold at a solid... I'll call it like 1995 or better. You probably got a decent game on your hands.
Yeah.
Now, when you start having to offload games for the $15-ish price point, you're like, this one, this probably didn't do so well. They're probably sitting on excess stock that they've got to get rid of. There's a problem here. When you're selling a game for sub $10, this is a flaming pile of garbage, Chris. They are literally saying, I have to offload this for anything. The Mass Effect Andromeda is sub $10.
Oh my gosh.
And so when you've hit sub 10, and that game hit it quick. It was not 2 years of inventory. It was, okay, 60. No, not 60. 40? No takers at 40. 20? Okay, nobody's buying it. How about like 952?
How much of that though do you think was? So how much of that do you think was really focused on like because the infamous part for that game was the faces looked like they'd been beaten to death, like just an artist went through.
Looked like an Elder Scrolls game. Sorry, I had to go.
Oh man, that was rough. Uncalled for, sir. But yeah, I mean, I think that there were some artistic things that made their way on Reddit, turned into memes, and like that just kind of did it in.
Yeah, it sunk the ship.
I don't know if it's really that terrible of a game. To be honest, I was super excited about it. It looked good before it came out.
Was.
And then if it's under $10, maybe I will buy it.
So we'll come back to that. We're going to hold that for some of the greatest hits in the next section. But another one that's been, I think, probably of most interest recently. So they tried to kind of make, we talked a little bit about Medal of Honor, but they tried to really go with this kind of online multiplayer, knowing that people were playing Call of Duty in spades, people were doing the online sports. And so a big game and franchise for them was Titanfall.
Yeah,
that was supposed to be, huge studio with a big, as big a name as big a name in the industry as you are going to find. Put a ton of money behind it, and original Titanfall did okay. Relative to I think their expectations, probably underperformed because it needed to be the biggest thing ever. Titanfall 2, though, is also in that like $15 to $10 category.
Which is unfortunate.
And it's funny because, for multiplayer games, it's tough. Because like you said, you can't play every multiplayer game. You can't play every single-player game, but you have a much better shot of playing a lot of single-player versus staying with any multiplayer game where you've got to have a friend group that's kind of traveling with you and playing. And Titanfall 2... it is far down on the list of what the cool kids are playing. It was funny. I had somebody in a group who said that their son was playing Titanfall because they were burned out on a couple of other games. And I was like, wow, so that's what it takes to get a Titanfall group together. How it's just like you have played everything under the sun, and then finally like, this is like $15. I'll give this a shot. And it never. I mean, Respawn is a big company. And it had that's when you were talking about Chris, Cliff Bleszinski, Epic Games fame, comes to you and says, Chris, I got the thing. I got the next big thing. There's no sure bet, but that's a pretty this guy knows how to make a game. This guy's been associated with hits. Respawn, I mean, they made the biggest games.
Yeah.
And you can't get any more sure thing than that. And this thing was not a sure thing.
Now, I have not played it, but what I've heard is that this is one of the diamonds in the rough where, like, you're right, it was... The first one was expected to be the biggest thing on the planet. It came down and it kind of hit like a ton of bricks, and people were like, it was okay. It was good, but it wasn't like long term. It just couldn't compete. 2, I heard, was really, really, really good if you would spend the time and the money to give it a chance. And I think that, it was undone a little bit by the fact that, at this point, EA has kind of become like next thing to Comcast as far as like most hated company.
Right.
They've also, they also didn't really, people were really worried that, like Titanfall 1, the player base would kind of just dwindle to nothing very quickly, and people don't want to, quote unquote, invest in a game that the player base goes down on. I still think, I've heard it's excellent. People who have played it objectively said it's a good game, 2, rather. I would give it a shot too. And one of the things that's just so funny, I was just kind of trying to remind myself, I actually thought that game was only for Xbox One.
Right.
I really did. And turns out, it did come out for PS4 and other consoles, other targets. But, that's the funny thing is I just looked at it and I just thought, maybe I got it confused. But as an average player, I didn't understand that it came out for a console that I owned. And that was maybe because there was a little bit of a, if I'm not mistaken, there was a little bit of an exclusivity period maybe with
you might be right.
Titanfall
I can't remember.
Kind of like what happened with the Tomb Raider game that had a year exclusive on Xbox and then died on PS4 when it came out, despite the fact that it was a 9.5 out of 10 game. But I think those are the things that we still have some of these kind of lingering issues, and I don't know. I don't know if they should do another Titanfall. I think if I were EA, I would rather focus on Titanfall than Medal of Honor, another FPS category, or if I wasn't going to do something that was off kilter from what COD was doing, in Battlefield, I would go off to a different thing. I would go find a different flair instead of just being, hey, we're going to announce at the beginning of the year that COD's going to be World War II, and okay, well, we're going to be World War II, or we're going to be Vietnam. Oh, we'll do Vietnam.
Yeah.
That's not going to help.
And it's interesting that a lot of the multiplayer focus, well, there's plenty of games that are supporting big player bases. Destiny and now Destiny 2 have been one of the bigger games. And those games are a mess in their own right. Yeah. But the fact that they have captured a significant player base, now they're trying, EA is trying to come back with Anthem, which was, by the time this posts, EA, all the materials from E3 has been out in the public. There's more videos, there's more footage talking about what it is. But I will tell you, I was texting with a friend, and I was just saying, this looks like basically people with jetpacks running down a corridor.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's excited about it.
At first, I was kind of thinking like, okay, maybe it's like Mass Effect with jetpacks and there's some more shooter elements like Destiny, and maybe they can pull this off. The more I see of it, the more all of these fears start creeping in, where I just say, I don't know that I trust them to get this right. And we'll kind of talk about it more in the next section, but they have started to build a track record for themselves that would suggest that they are much more likely to say, I've got to hit a holiday release schedule at all costs, and yeah, maybe it's a little linear, but we're going to make this 8 more times in the next 10 years, and so we'll get it right eventually.
Well, they'll all have some extra time this year because 2018, I'm already seeing just a little bit of E3 coverage we've seen so far. Everyone's pushing all the games to February 2019 because of Red Dead.
The 800-pound grill.
Yeah, there's just no way, but. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what you alluded to already, which is the disasters that EA led.
So this is where I feel like we've been pretty measured up to this point.
I think so.
We've kept it on the up, all factual. Now this is going to go maybe partially slanderous, but
slightly
based on fact, very opinionated. So, Chris, we've talked about Blizzard. I've extolled the virtues of Blizzard a lot, and I would say I'm going to submit to you in the audience, Chris, that if Blizzard's mantra is we'll ship when it's ready, EA's mantra may as well be, we'll take a dump in a box, we'll slap some cover art on it, and we'll sell it to you if it means we make our ship date. That's where we are, Chris. In my mind, you can put that on the investor report, you can slap that on the front of the building.
Call it released.
Yeah,
ship it.
Exactly, ship it. And it is, I have read countless articles talking about the development cycles, Madden in particular. There's so much that's been written on Madden. But basically saying, yep, we know that these 20 things are broken. I got 12 months to ship the next game. Let's do 5
We'll patch it out.
And it's just, but not even. It's like, we'll patch that out in 4 more releases.
Oh, yeah.
What are you talking about? This doesn't work, or it is not good. And it's like, no, I'm shipping Madden 20XX. That's coming out on September X of next year.
About B-ball?
And I cannot fix this. That, to me, is a mindset that has put us on this collision course with the same crap getting released every year, problems never getting fixed, and people accepting mediocrity in their games in a way that I don't... Look, both of us appreciate the economics of game development. But there is a certain quality level that if it was there, more people would buy your game when they know it's going to be released half broken. then I'm sorry, they're going to wait for it to hit the bargain bin because that's the level of care you gave to the game.
Yeah, I think the only disaster of that nature that comes to mind in recent memory that is worse than an EA-led one would be, I'd say, Capcom and Street Fighter. I mean, really, whether you release Street Fighter with like
no characters,
don't worry, they're coming later. You can buy them or whatever it is. It was just not the right thing. And EA has it is. This is the problem, right? And we'll talk about this. Will be a recurring theme through this segment. We talked about fiduciary duty, which is called kind of boring stuff. Basically, just means that people who have respond to the company and public company have a duty to their investors to make sure that they maximize profit.
Yeah,
if they hit those growth curves you're talking about, right? If the I haven't actually looked at, you probably have. I haven't looked at some of their filings and things, but there's probably some sort of growth in there that's like 4 to 5% or something kind of insane when you eventually get to this asymptote, right? You eventually hit this level that you can't grow 4, 5, 6% year over year. And the problem is they have to start finding new ways to either make more money, right? More revenue, or cut costs. And there's this line where you can't fire everyone in the company to effectively make more money because you're spending less. You can't, sometimes you can ask for more money. Games we talked about already, the price point for some of these games, at least in the US, is pretty fixed. So you can't ask for more than $60 for a game necessarily. So what do? Well, to your point, Aaron, you don't fix bugs. You don't spend a lot of time on that. You don't put all the content in. You ship the thing 3 or 4 months early knowing that you're going to patch it. And what we're seeing now is, we saw a little bit with some of the examples we're going to get to later with Star Wars, but except for maybe 1 or 2 examples, which we will talk about, there haven't been too many big backlashes prior to something that happened in 2017. Before, in 2016 or 15, whenever the first Battlefront came out, people were like, whoa, there's no campaign here. What's going on? You guys just didn't make the game. And EA's like, so?
Yeah, so what?
Yeah, what? No, this is a game. This is a game.
I'm here, boys and girls.
No, move along. Buy the game. Move along. That was a little bit of an interesting.
You got a pre-order, Chris?
Oh, I have to. 2 of them.
Pre-order
5
bonus,
of them.
right? Okay,
10
we're
of
good.
them.
We're
good. Yeah, I know. Much like Red Dead, I pre-ordered the collector's box that doesn't come with the game.
Nice. I'm sure that.
Wait, let me repeat. I pre-ordered a collector's box for the game that doesn't come with the game.
But why would?
Anyway.
But that's separate charge. I mean, they have to maximize the profit, Chris.
Why would the collector's box come with the game?
Why would it come with the game?
$100 for the game. Well, I mean, you maximize profit by not including the game in the game collector's edition purchase.
Have you pre-ordered your Madden 2019 fist bump edition?
20XX actually.
I really do hope they just. Brief aside, I really do hope that there is something with the fist bump edition, because that is, I feel like it's necessary for all the bros games.
Man.
So there is no great jumping off point or place to start, but I really got to just lead with, I don't want to bury the lead. We got to start with what, in my lifetime, I can't imagine there being a bigger flop or disappointment than Spore. How many people remember Spore? I would have paused with that. I could almost just literally hit the stop recording button and just say, Spore, I'm out. And then people would mull that one over for a while and say, wow, I forgot about that. And with good reason that you forgot about it. This is especially, I think, timely given that we're coming fresh off the heels of another E3 conference. Spore, if there was ever a game that E3 has hyped to just this absolute fever pitch. I mean, this is like the vaporware that somehow kept winning games of shows. Like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. The press was completely in the pocket. Mm-hmm. This was going to be the thing that ends all video games and draws all players to it because nothing else can stand in its wake. I can't even describe. I don't think people could put words to the level of just disappointment and disbelief at how far from their expectations that game actually was. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've never seen anything that even approaches that in terms of gap between those two of expectation versus reality at a level where people almost just couldn't even talk about it and verbalize it. It was just wow, okay, you got me, EA, you got my $60, and I waited for 5 years and watched a lot of teaser trailers, and man, this wasn't anything.
What was the other one, the game that came out last year that was similar to that?
Oh, I know what you're talking. It's tip of my tongue, and I wish I would have written it down.
Anyway,
yeah, okay, it'll come to me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That one also comes close.
Last Man Standing? No, okay. I'm making words up at this point. I'm sorry.
But no, I think you're right. I mean, Spore was just I had put that out of my memory, and I'd rather just not dig that skeleton out of the grave. It's just one of many, right? And then we're talking about this maelstrom of disasters.
Well, we'll pass over that grave and we'll go to the next one.
I mean, we didn't need to, or else we'd be here all night. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I am looking at this list and just thinking about what we're going to talk about. There are so many disasters. I can't even, granted, you could argue, okay, they're bigger than everyone else. They're going to statistically have, more failures than others, but these are all colossal failures. Yeah. If I could.
Please.
Earlier, we talked about the point that tripped me over from EA is just a company I used to love that's kind of making crappy games to... I hate these
Mortal
people.
Enemy.
And I hate them as much as Comcast.
Ooh.
And I just hope that they just go under was SimCity 4.
Oh, man.
I have, I was not a big fan when Maxis was taken.
Neither was I.
I know, you can argue, fairly enough, you could probably argue as a Sims player that people who love The Sims love The Sims. And you could argue that they have done great things for that game franchise if you're a Sims person. But
we'll judge those people in a moment.
We will. But the SimCity 4 debacle, just to refresh your memory, just so that your brain starts to explode slightly, is they released SimCity 4, which if you're not aware of, it's a city building game, right? They've been around for many, many decades. I played every single one of them since I was a kid. You go build your city. There's no need to really have an online presence. But
Don't
you could
want
also,
one.
but you could say, you could fairly say it would be kind of cool maybe if you have some sort of trade routes. You could talk to, there's an online component that could be talked about that could be cool, right? What does EA do? Oh no, we're going to put it out there with basically DRM. That means that you absolutely have it. It has to be online at all times.
Yep.
Now, that's bad and it's egregious, but a lot of companies do it. Okay. It kind of killed Microsoft for the Xbox, right?
We're moving on. We're moving on.
We're
past it.
But what does that really mean to you as a player? That means when you get super excited, you go out and buy this game day one, you come home, you're like, I have finally cleared my calendar, the kids are asleep, my wife is asleep, she's reading, whatever. I'm going to play me some SimCity until 3 a.m. You turn on the game and it says, can't connect to server, you can't play the game. And oh, by the way, that's not just that night. That's the next week and a half.
Oh, yeah.
And Maxis, Maxis, of course, and EA are like, oh, well, we're going to try to work through this. We're going to try. The answer isn't, for a while, we're going to take the online requirement out. We're going to try and, solve this.
Try again tomorrow.
We're going to try to backstep this garbage to say that the $50, $60 you just spent was actually worth something.
Now, it gets even worse when you talk about SimCity 4 because my favorite part that really, and luckily I waited enough to read the coverage on this before I bought, so I didn't buy it, essentially.
Me neither.
But I remember reading people and just I could feel their rage, Chris. So remember, go all the way back to single-player SimCity where you're building this perfectly sculpted masterpiece of a city, and you're saying, man, this is pristine. Everybody is walking or taking trains, and there's parkland everywhere there should be. No, Chris, when you're in online world, I can take your pristine city, and because they're interconnected, and I can build a strip mine and a nuclear waste facility that pollutes your city because it carries over because I'm in the map next to you, Chris. I'm moving in. I'm like Cousin Eddie. I'm like Cousin Eddie dropping a deuce on the lawn and making sure that I'm here. It's
so bad.
It is unbelievable that they did. I'm sitting here like
it's PvP
Chris,
cities, right?
Yes, it's PvP cities, and I'm sitting here like, Chris, all I want is my little dollhouse of a city that I can look and admire and say, look at what I have created. And they wouldn't even give me that.
No, and what happened? So I was ready to buy that day one. I loved that game. I saw all the problems, and I stopped. I actually got to the point where once they apologized after I don't know how many weeks or days it was, they apologized and said they were going to make it right. They did all sorts of crazy things. it is the first game that I have morally decided I didn't want to give them my money. They were not worth my dollars for that. And what did I do? I went out and I bought City Skylines, which is an excellent game.
Much better game. We played it on an episode of the show.
Millions and millions and millions and millions of times better than SimCity, current SimCity. If you want to play a city game, play that.
Yeah, and I'll never go back to SimCity.
No, I never will.
We're done.
Never will. And that's sad because Maxis was... I loved Maxis. I mean, I love the company, and I feel bad for the people who were there. Because, even at the time of this debacle, you could see it. It was hard to see in some cases because they had to be careful about how they veiled their comments. But, employees of the company were just sad that they put all this time and effort into this game they thought was really fun, and a decision that was way above their head, way above their pay grade, had literally just turned like long-term, lifelong fans of the game like me into like, you're not going to get $1 of my hard-earned money, and that's the thing that really is rough.
So Chris, let's keep the rage train going, because even though I have not yet experienced this, I have watched this on YouTube, so I have kind of felt the pain, maybe slightly more indirectly. But we talked about the Mass Effect series earlier, and how that was the hotness at the end of Mass Effect 2. There was no bigger hyped game during the year than when Mass Effect 3 came out. And this was going to be this epic conclusion to this trilogy, this story that people loved, this world that people loved. And then the ending happened, and people got to the ending. I have never seen such a public outcry over a game story than that game. I mean, people were outraged at a level where it's bad when they had to literally patch the game to release a revised ending for the game. That I will tell you, I have watched the original version and I have watched the revised version, and it doesn't get a whole lot. I mean, it is kind of the acknowledgement that, hey, we'll give you like 40 more seconds or whatever it was to try and throw you a bone. But the disappointment. Now, I think many people universally say like Mass Effect 3, everything up until the ending, I think people generally think that's a good game.
Yeah. But
I mean, you want to talk about a franchise that went from first to worst in a matter of minutes of playtime. I had friends that loved that series. Again, both of us, we've grown up on Square Enix games, so I did not get my start in kind of Western RPGs. I have no problem with people who like those. I enjoyed the series, but it's not my main franchise, let's say. But I know people who that is like their Final Fantasy VI, and when they experienced that ending, you could see the despair on their face of how bad they felt, and I felt for them.
It's not, in my mind, it's not that. Like, I love Mass Effect. I would play any Mass Effect that came out. And I actually didn't finish 3 because all these people were starting to talk about this. I think the real thing is just kind of a catastrophe of errors, or calamity of errors, rather. The thing that was so bad about it was not so much that the ending was terrible. I mean, it wasn't a great ending, by all stress.
It wasn't.
But going into this, they were saying, this is a trilogy. This is the last game you get with Shepard and these characters. This is it. Enjoy it. And the ending was such a horrible send-off for these characters. Such a terrible misstep that everyone was like, you can't believe, it's like saying that you spend all this time in this movie, 3 hours in this movie, right? That, everyone's like, there's hope, there's eternal, like, we're going to rebuild this city, it's going to be great, and then it gets nuked in the last 2 seconds. You're like, well, damn, I wasted my time.
See you later.
That's what this was like. And so people were so frustrated at that. It was just, and little did we know they were going to, we probably should have figured it out, that they were going to try and reboot this thing again later on. But for a while there, it was just horrible for them to do that. And I feel bad for both people on both sides. I don't know why there was such an outcry necessarily, because like you said, I went and watched both of them as well. And they're not great endings, but they're not, I've seen worse. I mean, I've seen plenty worse.
Well, the good news is, Chris, they didn't stop there. They said, no, we're going to do, this is like Team Redemption at this point. Let's take the charred remains of whatever the Mass Effect franchise was. Let's just finish it off and just, let's put the sulfuric acid on top of the corpse and just dispose of all of it. Post Andromeda, I have heard so many people, I heard many apologists try to say, it's okay, it's fine. I know exactly 0 people that if Mass Effect whatever was released tomorrow, they would be putting down a pre-order or be willing to play it.
Yeah, there's no way.
They lost so much trust with Mass Effect Andromeda that I don't know that this is I am certain they will release another game. No doubt about that, because again, the sulfuric acid on the corpse is not the EA way. They will not stop at that. They will keep going. There's at least probably 2 more games that will come out, but in terms of where I hear people, I don't think there's a lot of buyers. I mean, they lost a significant piece of their player base coming out of that game. But Chris, let's get to another category of failure, because EA, they diversify their failure. So Chris, how about class action lawsuit failure? That was an impressive one. I did not experience this firsthand, but you talk about performance issues and bugs. Battlefield 4 really took the cake to the point where they're like, this is an unplayable game, and you literally sold me a non-functioning piece of software to the point where let's talk through class action lawsuit. A judge has to certify that there is a class of people that have been offended or wronged in a way to allow you to form a class and say, yes, all of you people can band together and simultaneously sue the crap out of this person or entity. It's that bad, Chris, where they say, no, you didn't get a game. You can sue this person because they sold you. They took the dump in the box and sold it to you, and you didn't get anything for it. That is a level. I mean, we've railed on unfinished games for a long time on this show. But let's be honest. Most games that ship, whether you are disappointed or not, they will let you get from point A to point B and finish the game. You may hate it every step of the way, but there is a point A and a point B that you can get through. When you cannot even play the game that you purchased in a functional way, I'm sorry, but I expect better out of a publisher on the scale of EA. I'm sorry, anymore. But it's like freaking class action lawsuit. So something has gone wrong here, Chris.
So the question, the $1 million question, Aaron, given that spectacular nuclear bomb on the freaking, which is worse, that or Star Wars Battlefront 2? I mean, really, here's another example.
Pay to win, Chris.
It's like,
give you them dollars.
We're here all week. We could talk about these forever, but here is
we could talk about Dead Space 3, which did the same thing. Oh my God. Which formed the basis for Battlefront 2.
So here's the pay to play garbage where the internet banded together, and rightfully so, and attacked him. The most downvoted comment in Reddit's history. Reddit was made in 2004. 14 years have gone by. And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, there are subreddits with Nazis in them, like true Nazis, and crazy child killers and crazy crap like that. Yet an EA comment was the most downvoted one in all of the systems. So it tells you something right there.
I mean, we're breaking boundaries. I feel like we have really set history with the content of the show.
World Records.
Really,
I mean, this is just amazing. So this game was so bad, and there was such a vehement pushback from the community. And I'm always for you have to listen to the community, but the community had a really good point, despite whatever side you're on, and the response was yeah, we're going to keep doing this, until finally it got so bad that they had to turn it off, turn all the pay-for-play garbage that was out there, turn it off for months at a time, and then kind of casually just slip it back in. And the funny thing about all this, after all this huge debacle, think about funny thing is E3 comes along, right? Just last week, right? E3 comes along, and they come up there and they say they have a couple games. I don't even know what the games are called. I don't really even care. But they come up, and of course everyone's watching. Are they going to say loot boxes? Are they going to say loot boxes? And they'd say, we have no loot boxes in this game. And we're like, oh, wait a minute.
Ooh, got my attention.
Did they learn? And then they start talking to you more about how they're going to deliver you these this kind of content that they want, and you start realizing, I forgot the name, but they literally rebranded loot box to some sort of cases or something like that. Oh, buy your cases.
It's a loot cylinder, Chris.
Really? You're really?
We changed the shape. We figured it, Chris. We learned our lesson. If we change the shape of how we deliver the loot to you and make you pay for it,
and so I'm just going to leave that one there because I don't want to frustrate anyone. I don't want to frustrate myself or you or anyone else listening. That was just horrible.
Well, then, Chris, we've just wasted all your money on loot boxes. Let me just waste your time. Let's add insult to injury.
Good.
I could almost, much like with Spore, just say The Sims and just leave it at that. But Chris, this is the ultimate time waster that I have ever seen in my life. Now, there may be people who watch this and said, I had a Sims phase. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I played this game, and I never will forget just sitting there saying, all I am watching is this person who is like, can't use the bathroom correctly, they're dumping dishes, and they just drown themselves in the pool. Like, this is what I just bought.
Is saying you had a Sims phase kind of like saying I huffed gas for 6 weeks and then sorry.
I
don't need to offend anyone.
I would have rather been the person face down in the pool than the buyer of that game again.
Aaron, I think we've lost all of our Sims fans. All one of them.
Yeah, all one of them. Like, hey, if that person will come out and admit themselves, like I will buy you a copy of the Sims game of your choice if you will out yourself on this show as a Sims player. But Chris, we've got to cap it off with the most recent example. So you mentioned the loot cylinders or whatever nonsense they're referred to. But Chris, let's be honest. We watched E3 and we were texting back and forth. That's not what caused the rage-inducing fury of comments between the two of us. Chris, what was that game that... Is this like, the Voldemort, you can't name the game? This is causing Chris to growl angrily?
Let's just say this. Back in the day, back in the 90s, there were many, many great games. There are many games, games came out that we look at today so fondly that they get remastered and remade all the time. Like Blizzard just did this for StarCraft, right? An amazing RTS. Believe it or not, there were, I think, better RTSs in the days, and one of those was Command and Conquer. And it's almost as if you go back and you watch, and I encourage you to maybe watch just a small part of the train wreck that is the EA press conference for this year, where they show that they're remaking Command and Conquer. They don't actually tell you the name of the game until the end of it, which probably intentional. They may have thought that it was intentional because they wanted to generate hype and all this stuff. I know that deep down, it was intentional because they didn't want us to throw things at them while they had people on the
They wanted to clear off the stage.
On the stage. But, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, Command and Conquer would be a game, an EA game, that I would love to buy.
I would agree with that.
I would love to buy. I love Command and Conquer. But what did they do to it? What one thing could they have done to Command and Conquer? If you're not watching on YouTube, you would see Aaron picking up his phone here. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you're correct. They made it mobile.
Chris, the mobile market is huge. Huge. We cannot miss this opportunity, Chris. I mean, there's so many people with a mobile phone.
That's right. So we're going to take a game that is really, really awesome, really complex real-time strategy game that has roots back in the early 90s where it was just an exceptional game, laid the groundwork for what we play today, and we're going to dumb it down to a piece of utter garbage and throw it on the iOS store for $15.
Whoa. Yeah, iOS store, big. Nokia N-Gage, market opportunity.
Bam.
Expansion.
No one's there.
Right.
All 20 people with the N-Gage.
The only person releasing games.
See, this is why we don't run big companies like this, Aaron.
Sega Game Gear? Could we port this to the... I mean, we have a lot of experience developing for Sega consoles.
We can actually, I bet we can get the license and put it on Wii U.
We could. Chris, this is like...
There's no one playing Wii U now.
We underestimated the market opportunity of this, Chris.
We really did.
We need to buy shares now. I mean, we need to end this podcast and buy heavily on EA.
Part of me wants to know, actually, if it meant... I don't want to... I have an undying urge to buy all the physical copies and then burn them and put it on Instagram.
Put it next to the ET dumpster out in the desert.
Yeah, exactly. But that would require me to actually give EA money, which I just can't happen.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Chris, I don't this has been like, I don't know how long we've been talking through this segment, but this has just been like this barrage of sadness and disappointment and anger that I'm sure has resonated at some parts or at all parts with our listeners and our viewers.
They're probably like, wow, they're pretty measured in their analysis of this in the beginning, and then it just goes off a deep end.
And I don't even think we covered everything. Like we just took the greatest hits, and I would love for our audience to fill in any gaps to where you've said, you just like pummeled us for a while and then just buried us 6 feet under. But no, Chris, you could have gone to 9 feet under if you just would have remembered this game. If there are any of those that we have overlooked or not given the proper, honoring to, please do hit us up on any number of media formats. Hit us up on the Twitters. Hit us up on businesscasualgamers.com. Post a video of you crying on YouTube and send it a
reaction video of you listening to the podcast.
Yeah, whatever it takes to kind of capture that raw emotion and remind us what we have left out to complete your EA Games experience. Please hit us up, and I'd say we'd love to hear it, but maybe it will just make us cry in the corner as well. But hopefully this has been a fun show, especially good post E3 thing, I think, to give a spin to it. So with that, we're going to bring episode 55 to a close. As I mentioned, we will be back with the next episode shortly. The good thing about having some time off is we've got a lot of fun show ideas, and we thank you, the listeners, for bringing many of them to us.
Thanks for sticking with us, too.
Absolutely. we greatly appreciate it. And so with that, we'll bring the episode to the close, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, all.